Alright everyone, welcome back to the day 36 of our daily leetcode challenge, and today we have got check if one string swap can make strings equal. So in this question they have given us for two strings s1 and s2, and they are of equal length, and what we need to find is if we can swap two characters in string s1 or two characters in string s2 so that they become equal. When I mean two character swap, it basically means a single swap, because a single swap can happen can occur between two characters in the given string. So here in this case we have s1 and s2, and in this case s1 and s2. If you take a look at the first example, in the word bank and the word KANB, if you swap the first and the last characters in bank, you will get KANB, and if you swap the first and last characters in KANB, you will get bank. So it means that a single swap in either s1 or in a single swap in either s2, if you do that, it becomes equal to the previous one. If we swap b and k in this one s1, it will become s2, and if we do the same thing on s2, it will become s1. Let's take a look at s1 and s2 in this example. If you take a look at this example, we have got grown here and wrongen here. If you see about grown, you will see that g and w is swapped on these two positions. In these two positions g and w are swapped, then this becomes wrongen, and if in wrongen g and w are swapped here, this will become to a grown, meaning s1. So both of these words will be returning a true, because we can perform a single swap and change s1 to s2 or s2 to s1. So this is the condition of a single swap. So this is what they want us to do, provided two strings s1 and s2. Check if by a single swap s1 can become s2 or s2 can become s1. Now if you take a look at the example 2 that they provided, attack and defend, even though they are of same length, but these two words are completely different, meaning they are not even close to forget about single swap, they can't be ever kind of made equal no matter what swaps you do, because they are completely different words. Even though the lengths are equal, but they are different words. So what can we conclude from this examples where we are getting true and examples where we are getting false, is that in the cases where we are getting true, if you try to compare both of these words character by character, you're gonna find at least if it's getting satisfied in a single swap, at most one swap, you're gonna get two indexes I and j where these two words will be differing, and that's max, like that's it, like exactly two indexes you're gonna find in both s1 and s2 where these two words will be differing. For in this case, you see a and a in both these cases are at their corresponding indexes, but these two words at index 0 are different and in index 3 are different. Same thing will happen with grown and wrongen as well. If you see, all these words which are in these indexes are equal in their corresponding indexes, but at these two indexes we are seeing a difference. But in these two cases, we are seeing at each index we are seeing different characters. At each index we are seeing different characters. So nothing can be done for words like these. But in words where we find exactly two indexes I and j, such that the words differ at that places, in that case we can at least take a look if swapping these values at I and j can bring s1 to s2 or s2 to s1, right? And also one more thing, if you notice, in the cases where if s1 is getting swapped to s2 or s2 is getting swapped to s1, in both the cases, one thing that we can conclude is all these words, both s1 and s2, are going to have the same number of characters and the same number of frequency as well, because only then if you swap the characters, they're going to have, like s2 will become s1 only if s2 has first all the characters that s1 has and also all the frequency that s1 has. Only then s2 can be swapped to s1, and the same way goes the other way around as well. S1 can be swapped to s2 if s1 has all the characters that s2 has and the frequencies as well. In this sense, the question is a kind of an easy one, and the length of the s1 and s2 are both reaching up to 100. So what we need to do is we need to find those two indexes I and j where the characters are differing, and then we'll have to kind of do the swapping on our own. We swap these values, we kind of swap, like let's say we are comparing each value between s1 and s2 index by index. We find the first I and the first j where the characters are differing. So we can either swap values in s1 or either can swap values in s2, is up to us. Eventually, by after swapping, both the words will become equal. So in strings, we know that strings are immutable. So we'll kind of try to convert this before doing any comparison. We'll try to convert both S1 and S2 back to a list. In this manner, if once we convert both these S1 and S2 to a list, it will be easier for us to swap values, because lists are mutable but strings are not mutable. So that's step one. We'll have to first kind of like convert S1 and S2 both to a list, both to a list, and then we'll start comparing both of these values. For each index, we'll start comparing and find the two indexes where we are getting different characters. In this case, we found that our values at index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 we have, and we found that the values at index 0 and values at index 3 are different. Once we find those indexes, we'll perform the swap. We can perform swap on S1 or we can perform swap on S2. Either way is fine, because eventually the characters will become equal. And if that's the case, we'll return true, or else we'll return false. So this is how the algorithm is going to work. Let's try to kind of dry run on one of these examples, what we are going to do. So let's take bank and cab as the example that they gave us, which is the first example, and we'll see. So I'm taking bank as the first S1 and KANB as the second as the S2. So as we discussed, first we need to convert them back to a list. So that's that. We have converted both of these strings to a list. Now we need to do index by index comparison to find the two indexes where the characters are differing. So and if it's more than that, we can't really do much, because if it's like more than like say we found four indexes where they are differing, then there's no point, because we know it can't be swapped. Like even though we swap it, it will never be equal. It only has to be exactly two places where the words should be different, so that once we swap it, it will become equal. Only two indexes where the characters should be different, otherwise it won't work. If let's say further down the line we had few more characters that were same, but we found, like let's say we had C here and Z at both indexes, and then D here and E here. So in this case, we'll find that we got three indexes, B, K and D, K, B and E. So even though we swap here K and B here, but then again this would be left out, so we can't do any more swap, and we are only allowed to do at most one swapping. So that is why, this is the main reason why we only need to find, we can only do a swap where the only places where the characters are different is at max 2. Only two indexes the characters should be different. If it's more than that, it's beyond our savings. So let's try to dry run on bank and cab. So now we have this. We found that index at we started from this index 0, 1, 2, 3. We found that index 0 has different characters, so we make a note of it. Initially we'll declare two variables, idx1 and idx2. Both of these variables will be 0, 1 and 2. So once we reach at the 0th index, we compare, we found that we encountered two different characters. So we set idx1 from 0 to 0, and then from moving forward we found that the next different character occurs at index 3. So we put idx2 to 3, and that's it. So now we have these indexes 0 and 3. So what we can do is, either we can swap these values at these index in S2 or in S1. That's up to us. I'll try to swap them in S2. You can do it in S1 as well. Once that swapping part is done, what we need to do is, now let's try to swap the values at 0 and 3 in S2. So this will now become like this, P, A, N, K. Once the swapping part is done, what we need to do is, we need to convert this list back to a string. So we'll use a join operation on a list, so that it gets back to the string that it originally was, or kind of you can say the modified one now. So once we perform the join operation on both the list S1 and S2, we'll be left with bank, and we'll see that they are equal. So this is how the algorithm will be working. Let's try to code this up now. So again, S1 and S2 are two strings of equal length. So there could be some cases where both S1 and S2 are same. In that case, we don't have to do any swap and just return true, because there will be no point doing any swap, right? So if S1 is equal to S2, if that's the case, then we simply return true. That's out of the way. Now let's try to declare those two variables that we discussed. idx1 is equal to 0 and idx2 is equal to 0. And I will also set a variable called flag, which will be true initially. The reason why I am doing this is because once we find the character, the first index at which we found a different character, we should update idx, and once the idx1, and once that is done, we'll set this flag to false. so that when going forward we'll find different other index at which the characters were different, we only update idx2 and not idx1. That is why I'm using this flag variable here. You'll see how we are implementing it once we start coding. So now let's try to loop. Now again we also need to convert both these s1 and s2 to list. So list 1 will become list of s. Here we converted s1 to a list, and list 2 will be also a s2 will also be a list here. Now both these s1 and s2 are nothing but lists now, like we saw here. Now we can start our iteration and kind of compare for each index r. So for r in range length of list 1, any list is, and you can take any list here, list 1 or list 2, because both are of equal length. Now once we are iterating, we need to check if they are different at an index r. So let's say that in the case of bank and cab, we saw that the first value at index 0 is different in both list 1 and list 2. So if list 1 not equal to list 2r, this would mean that we encountered a character at which the characters were different. This is kind of, like, let's say, the first index. Why? Because the flag is still true. So we'll set idx1 to this index r and set flag to true or to false. So if flag is true, which is right now, in that case we just only need to update the first index. This would mean that like this is the first index at which we found a different character, and if flag is false, which will eventually do after that, in that case we'll set idx2 to that value. So what we are doing here is, initially when the loop runs and the flag is true initially, the first character, the very first index at which we found different characters, when that happens right here, the flag will be initially true, and we'll set that index 1 to r. To not kind of modify this index 1 back again, we are setting this flag variable to false, so that when further down the line we found another index at which we found different characters, this loop doesn't go in this if condition, but rather goes in the else case. So that's why we are setting the flag to a false. After the first modification, or you can say after finding the first index at which the characters differed, we set the flag to false. And further down the line, if you find any other indexes at which the characters were different, it will always go and update index 2, not index 1. So that is why we are using this flag variable. Now after this loop ends, we'll be having two variables, idx1 and idx2, wherein you could say that the characters were different, and we can kind of try and do the swap now. We found those two indexes where we found different characters. So now since we have those two characters at idx1 and idx2 in both this list 1 and list 2, let's try to do the swap thing. Now in Python, to quickly swap two variables, let's say that I have variable a and variable b. A has variable 10, value 10, and b has value 5. If I want to swap these variables and their values, instead of declaring a temp variable and doing all that, there's a neat Python trick to do this, which is simply writing like this. So this right here is going to swap the value of a and b. So in the end, if we print now, the value of b will be 10 and a will be 5. We're going to use the same thing, but instead of a and b, we'll be having idx1 and idx2 in both list 1 and list 2. So basically we are trying to swap the list 1 idx1 and list 2 idx2. You could say that we are kind of trying to modify, as we discussed, we will be modifying s2. So in this case, what we are modifying is list 2 idx1 and list 2 idx2. So these are the two characters that we found, the list 2 idx2. We found that idx1 and idx2 basically are nothing but these values 0 and 3. idx1 and idx2 are the two indexes that we found where the characters are different. Now we need to swap. As we discussed, we can swap either in s1 or in s2, it doesn't matter. So we are choosing s2 in this case. So that is why list 2 is there. So now what we need to do is swap the values in list 2, which are at index 0 and 3. So this is why I am having list 2 index 0 and list 2 index 3 getting swapped with getting swapped basically. So this is what we're going to do, ab comma ba. So I'm going to write this now. We can now, once the loop is terminated, we have idx1 and idx2. We need to modify list 2 in hopes that it becomes equal to list 1. So modify meaning swapping. So I'm going to write this now. We have list2 here, idx1 getting swapped with list2 idx2. We need put a comma here. So this is what is happening. We are swapping the characters. These are the two indexes, list1, idx1 and idx2, where we found the occurrence where the characters were different. Now since we found them, we are trying to swap those characters in list2 at those particular indexes, in the hopes that this will make it equal to list1. So and we know that if the swap is valid and if there is only one swap possible, you can either modify in list1 or in list2, it doesn't matter. So in this case I am trying to modify list2. Once that is done, we need to convert them back to the strings that were there, that original, now the kind of the modified strings that will be formed. So this will be done by the join operation. List1 is back to the string that it originally was, and list2 will also become this dot join list2. In this case, list2 is what we are getting after swapping. Now we simply need to return if these two strings are equal or not after this modification. So we can simply return this. Return if this string that just formed and this string that just formed, are they both equal or not. So this is what is happening in this case. We are just returning if after doing that single swap, a one-time swap between these two indexes 1 and 2 that we just formed, is the strings equal or not. So now if we run this, you see it's satisfying all the test cases. So this is why we kind of introduce this flag variable. This flag variable help us to make sure that idx1 is modified or kind of updated only on the first index at which we found different characters, and once that flag is turned to false, only idx2 is updated and not idx1 is updated for any other character further down the line having different characters. For any other index further down the line, if we found another set of kind of characters which are different, in that case we are only updating idx2 and not idx1. That is why this flag variable has been introduced. Once we have that, once we found those two variables idx1 and idx2 where we are finding that the characters are different, we need to make a swap. Since we are doing a single swap, so we can do it either in list1 or list2. In this case we chose list2 and we made the swap. This is the swapping part right here, just how we swap two variables in Python, same way we are doing. And this is the main reason we are trying the converting the string back to a list first, so that the swapping becomes easier, because lists are mutable in Python and strings are not. So once that is done, we kind of converted back to the list that back to the string that they originally were. List1 is unchanged, but list2 is muted now, because in the list version we updated the values right here, and we just simply need to return if after doing that operation both the strings are equal or not. And let's try to submit this. So as you can see, it takes almost 0 milliseconds and reads 100% of the solution. So pretty efficient solution. This is a linear time and no extra space complexity, because we are not introducing any extra space. Whatever we had, we just we kind of did of conversion. We only converted the strings that we had to a list. We didn't introduce any other kind of a list or a map in this case. So this is a linear time solution and a constant space solution as well. So yeah, that was it for today, everyone. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.